observations, and some of which I want to kind of have a little bit of a discussion about to be able to support how things could help with the future workshops. The first one, which I think has made a really big difference, was the fact that a lot of things were cut, but everything was accomplished and nothing felt rushed. And so it seemed like there was a really successful balance of the discussion and the practice, engaging in the event and the mini events and practicing those, the discussions around experiences, what facilitators shared for experiences and elicited from the participants. Um, so that was something that we had noticed on our side, and even the participants had noted, and they would have no idea what the pacing of previous workshops had looked like, but they had noted that they really appreciated the pacing and it felt like there was enough space and time to really talk through these things. So something I wanted to do was also ask Andy and Sandlin, since you're here to talk about what were the things that were cut, and whether you felt like those were the pieces, or the pieces that you had kept were the pieces that had really nailed the outcomes that you were looking for.
Well, without going back and looking, comparing agendas, I know one of the main things we did is we did fewer activities. So we had the 2 activity rounds, so we had 6 total instead of 9. Of course, the stuff that we cut out that we put in the orientation webinar also saved a lot of time. But that's off the top of my head, like I said, without going back and looking, that I can remember, I can think of.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just, we just kind of said we don't have time for all of these. So when we were kind of looking at it, we just looked at what we consider to be the core pieces of each cycle. I would also say we had fewer people. And so I don't know if part of it was that we just had fewer people, which led to fewer overall share outs and stuff.
Yeah,
I think that's
true.
possible. I think what was it was New Orleans had a pretty similar size group, but there was still a lot that it felt like it was harder to fit everything in that same amount of time. So I think the cutting did make a difference.
Well, I'd also add that even though we had fewer people, I was somewhat concerned that we wouldn't be able to fill the time. Once we got in there, I mean, people were talking. I mean, they did. We filled. I mean, the time we gave for them to reflect and talk about things, it filled. That wasn't the problem.
Clarification question. When you say, okay, so there were 2 activity rounds. When you say 6 total what?
Activities.
Oh, activities. Okay.
And I do want to note with that too, or with just the balance and the fact that nothing felt rushed, that when we were doing our agenda adherence observations, which you could see in the report, each of the outcomes that you had tagged, like the objectives and outcomes for the model that you had tagged with the agenda, we had directly observed something that accomplished those. So even though there was all those different pieces cut, you did still focus on those pieces that made sure everything was accomplished. So
in terms of things that were cut, I know that some of the things were just simply cutting down the number of slides in each session, right? Were there specific things that Sandlin and Andy, that you were looking at when you were looking at which slides to remove, to really kind of focus in on what the key objectives and outcomes were for that we can keep in mind ourselves for all the others?
I'd have to go back and look at it again, but with some of it, it was just like combining. but there may have been like multiple slides for something and we only needed a couple. It was, yeah. It was, I remember doing stuff like that. So we've got like the slide deck that we had pulled. We started with New York as a template. And then we went through and made changes or added some things or whatever, but also we didn't delete them, we just hid them. So you could go into our slides from San Antonio and you can see what we hid. Some things we may have deleted because we're not really even sure when they were there in the first place, but most of it's all still there. What I'm going to do is create a set of slides that don't have the hidden slides. But we'll still keep the ones that are hidden. Some of it just seemed, it was, like I said, I think some of it was redundancy. Some of it was just combining slides. But I'm sure there's some examples of stuff where we just didn't use. I know I can think of some of them were the slides that dealt with introducing the activities, and then the prompts for the activities, because we did those a little differently too. But we also made up like a document. Then we printed for them to take with them to the activities. So what could have been on the slides was also on this document anyway, or as well. So that's one thing I can remember.
If I remember right too, from the Wednesday night planning meeting, a lot of it had to do, at least from my perspective, a lot of the slides that got cut had to do with basically direct instruction information content. And some of those got cut for more in favor of the slides on the same topic, but that were more about some of the reflective questioning and discussion that would have elicited those ideas from the participants. So I think that also is what helped make it feel active and balanced between the amount of talking activity and the information that was being given. Sandlin, did you have any perspectives on the things that got cut?
No, I think what I think about what got cut is we just really tried to continue just letting participants come up with whatever it is they wanted to do, if that makes sense. Like letting them have the discussion.
Yeah,
I mean, basically just teeing up the conversations for them and then just letting it ride.
other thoughts or questions on that piece? And then I'll keep moving.
Well, I'll say one more thing, which actually is going to kind of, I guess, kind of a preview of what we'll see in the report. But I think that worked really well for a large reason, because we had the local informal educators who were there, who were willing to talk and who were willing to have those conversations and give examples and really kind of get it going from there.
Yeah, I think that actually leads a little bit into the next observation that I had, which was about how aligned the group of participants was to the workshop. And Jeanette and I had talked about that in terms of the selection process and potentially the benefit of that pre-orientation webinar, kind of setting expectations for what it was and what it wasn't. But it seemed as though all of the participants were very aligned to what the workshop was. And a lot of them were very experienced also. It seems like there was a lot of the scientists already had some relationships with each other or with the educators, had already been doing outreach. So they were very much kind of in that zone already. With that, it seemed that as though some of the gains that they experienced because of how aligned they were already, a lot of it had to do with the giving them the space and opportunity to practice and reflect on their engagement. Some of it was the educator confidence in initiating collaborations with scientists. And I believe, was this overall, yeah, awareness of opportunities to interact with NASA planetary science content. But I'm gonna pop up this graph on the screen real quick. Oh, um, Christine or Andy, would you be able to give me the opportunity to share or?
Let's see here. Sorry, don't know why that's changed. It used to not do that.
Oh, no worries.
I'm
I,
just gonna make you a co-host. That should allow you to do it.
all right. I won't mess with anything important. Okay, so here was the retrospective pre-post chart for these different items. And something we noticed, so one, a lot of the participants were already, very well aligned. And part of that might have led to the fact, or might have come out in this graph in the way that there's very little growth that has happened, but everyone is still ending up at 100%. And it's mostly because everyone was starting very high already, except for the educator confidence in initiating collaborations with planetary scientists, which is something that there was more growth in. Although there were 3 educators, so this was 2 of them had agreed and 1 hadn't for their pre. Everyone's still ending up at 100. So part of this, I think, comes down to the people who are attending, the people who are being selected for it. Some of them they're already there, they already have these relationships, they're already doing outreach to some degree. They're gaining from the opportunity to cement that. In fact, I think I had noted in there, it was during the debrief on site where I think one of the scientists had approached an educator and I had heard them ask like, hey, do you want to get together to do another space themed event like sometime next month? Um, and I think where I'm trying to get to with this is that when there are individuals who are already so well aligned, is there any part of the workshop model that can kind of support some more challenge or growth in individuals who already have a lot of these skills and connections? And I know it's challenging too when, you know, you can only admit a subsection of the people who apply. So Andy, I don't know if you have any thoughts on the selection process or kind of the previous experience, particularly of the scientists that might kind of support one, that incremental potential challenge in growing some of these skills, or if there's anything. I do have another note later about how possibly linking to some more specific strategies that maybe individuals feel like they don't have as much experience in as a way of providing that potential growth.
I don't know. Uh, One issue when it comes to selection is, like with the case of San Antonio, it wasn't really a selection process because we just didn't have a lot of applicants. Um, I don't know. We just need to be careful that in terms of the model, whatever we might do, and I'm not saying we don't support those who already have a good grounding in it, but we just need to be careful we don't. We just need to be careful when we think about what the purpose of the model is for these workshops.
Mhm.
I agree with Ed in terms of really liking the question about, are there are there other stretch goals? Are there other things that we might be able to have for people to to grow in, who come in with high, because ideally, right, for a workshop we want a little bit of both. We want people who have lots of room to grow and people who already are there because that's who needs to be in the discussion, right? We need to have people with both ends. And yeah, we have to have flexibility to base goals and stretch goals. Does anybody have any suggestions for some stretch goals that aren't fundamental to our objectives, but give room for growth for people who are already there?
At least I guess just from my perspective and something that I had noted from comments from participants is they a lot of them kind of fell back a lot on their previous experience and kind of did what they were comfortable with, which is a lot of their comments around why they picked the activity that they did, or why they engaged the way they did. A lot of the comments had to do with the fact that the workshop and the opportunity validated a lot of things that they already kind of knew or thought. Um, and something that I had wondered because of the fact that they were relying so much on their previous experience or previous activities is if the the strategies document or if um, different activities, I don't want to say assigned, but I feel like, being able to push someone a little bit outside of their comfort zone for what they already do for engagement to try a different strategy, use practice it through a different lens, practice it for a different audience. I feel like those might be enough, not so much in terms of a having a different goal, but just in thinking trying something that you are not already comfortable with so that you are getting a little bit more growth, developing a new strategy, thinking about this in a different way. I see your comment. Yeah, yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is that being able to challenge themselves differently instead of falling back into what they're comfortable if they already have a lot of that experience. Because that's where a lot of the opportunity for growth could come from.
Now, different audience might not be feasible at that workshop, but
During the engagement event, definitely. But something that we had noted from Miami, um, and I don't know that this was so much planned, but it was just something that had kind of happened in how the mini events were facilitated. Whereas we saw a lot of participants who, they did mock engagements with each other, and then they were like, okay, well now pretend I'm a 5-year-old, who's bilingual, or now pretend I'm a 40-year-old who, always wanted to get into this stuff but never could. And they had like practiced with each other through those different kinds of lenses. And I think even that alone might provide some of those opportunities to just think about it differently. And I do think some of that could be supported even just in trying different strategies more explicitly. And something we had been talking about internally was tracking. And this is why I had asked if we had gathered any of the planning sheets, because even though we had did observations of the strategies that were being used during the engagement, we weren't really able to tie that back to what did they say they were going to try in terms of their strategy when they were in the planning stage. And if we can link back well, I'm really intentionally going to try to use this strategy from the strategy document and be able to then observe how often they're able to use that during the engagement event might show that they're really practicing intentionally those different strategies. So it might even just take some more explicit linking back to try these different strategies out with each other and see how it goes and see how you might need to adapt.
Yeah, no, that's all sounds good. Now, so yeah, sorry, totally forgot during the workshop to pick up their planning sheets there. I think it was, I'm pretty sure it's even in the facilitator agenda. Um, but yeah, just totally forgot to do that. Um, and talking about the so Dylan, when you were describing, was that in Miami where when they were doing the activities, they were kind of like challenging each other?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
they were practicing and pretending, doing some different mock engagement with each other.
okay, great. Yeah, and I think that's another piece where I mean we could be real more explicit and intentional, and we're talking with the out of school time educators before the workshop that that's something we'd like their help in. Um, or or even if the scientists can have been in that position, and they want to do it, that's great. Um, yeah,
Ed's comment about how could we provide quick feedback during this while they're improving what they do. How can we provide quick feedback or group feedback while they're practicing?
I think that could be another opportunity, like very similar to Miami. I think what we saw too is the facilitators were also part of the mini events and were having some of those active discussions with the participants. There was a lot of back and forth during the mini event time. I think there was a lot of time devoted to the mini events, where there was just a lot of time to really dig in and practice and try different things and discuss it right then and there. And then immediately after discussing it, they're still standing around the crater, and then they're like, okay, now let me try something else. So I think the fact that facilitators were part of those discussions with the participants there, supported them trying different things and really reflecting, growing. And I think that in itself uh, provided some of the challenge and growth for those participants.
And when they were part of it, they were part of the discussion. They were eliciting further discussion with questions, or they were providing suggestions.
Um, I think it was a fluid back and forth of all, but I think Ed, maybe since you were there, do you have any insight on maybe how you approached those discussions around the mini events during that time?
You want
And
me to
Sandlin, you were
remember
there as well.
something that was how many months ago?
Yeah,
That's
that was a full year now.
yeah, a big ask.
Yeah.
I need to think about that. Payment.
I'm not sure. I think it's a difficult question too, because I don't know if it was the initial intention behind how the mini events were going to be facilitated, but it kind of naturally led that direction and
Yeah, that's
people
what
went with it and it was
I was thinking.
helpful.
Like no one went in that way, but I think we kind of like it was like an ad hoc thing, right? Let's try it out. And
But
it's very dependent on who's standing there. Like if they're really open to it, right? You can have these great conversations, and if they're kind of tentative, right, it's harder.
So putting myself back in that room, what I am seeing was that it was very improv-y. And what I'm remembering is that at first they kind of kept looking at me for some feedback, but I kept diverting the feedback back to them so they can talk to each other and go over it. And then they kind of just picked up on it and would improv and then feedback each other, which if I'm remembering correctly, I think that part went well. But since it was like improv, because it was like the group was already doing this, and I was just kind of standing back, very Moore's method styled of facilitation. Um, that process probably could have been facilitated better. But if I'm remembering correctly, the group feedback seemed to work really well. So I never had to step in and be like, well, how about this other thing? They were picking up on each other's um adequately criticizing each other in a supportive way. So I never had to step in.
And then they tried something different and kept going. And I think that's the piece that I'm trying to get to is that like that structure kind of allowed for the opportunity for participants to try a different strategy, try a different lens, get immediate feedback from each other, talk about it, try it differently. And I think the things that they could be trying differently could be tied to some of those explicit strategies or thinking about different kinds of audiences in for strategies or audiences that they're not already comfortable with. And I think that that kind of structure could support that and still be built into that mini event time.
So in Thaylen's prepared another or a new modified version of the strategies document for San Antonio. And one of the things that she did is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Thaylen, is we added a kind of a column to it where we gave people an opportunity to write in a strategy they tried or something specific they tried that reflected one of the strategies that's in the strategies document. Do we know,
It,
did any,
like it was we wanted to have space to say our ideas are just as important as your ideas, or your ideas are just as important as our ideas. And so the intention that we did, that we spoke, like we told them, but also wrote, is like we had our strategies and then we had space for them to write strategies that came in discussion or that they had thought of. We didn't support them writing it that well this time, but at least we've added it so that we can support that in the future.
yeah, my next question was, did we happen to capture anything that anybody may have written?
I think we did not.
Okay, well, maybe I might send an email out to ask if anybody did happen to write anything, if they would share that, or if they happen to write a lot, they could maybe just scan their sheets and send it to us or whatever. Just see if we got something.
I think it could also be as simple as too, because you organize the strategies document by the different sessions, right? Or am I misremembering? Was that
No, we actually renamed every section so that it matched exactly the sections we went through.
okay? So, I mean, I think even something as simple as, okay, we're doing the mini event during this session. Here are the relevant strategies from the strategies document that have to do with this session's content. Pick one and try it out during the mini event. That might give them some of that explicit grounding in something that they might not be comfortable with. And it's directly tied to that session's content. Would that make sense for based on the strategies that are grouped within the sessions?
I thought that was actually the point of it. That's why we listed the strategies for each session in a slide for each session right before the activities for them to do that. So although some of the strategies are really less about how you engage somebody in an activity and more about planning or interacting as a whole. Is that Andy Sandlin?
No, I think no, I think that's what I want to work with Katie this summer, like in the next couple weeks on, is like I want to make sure that we really do have like it's just super obvious to them what the strategy looks like. Because I think that's where people are kind of they're like, this is all great, but I need to see or hear or have a concrete idea of that strategy. And we're getting there. I think we're getting much better at just making sure each one is really concrete for them.
Well, one thing we did is that we showed we showed Kenda's video where she's talking about the interaction that she saw during the Houston event, and then the conversation she had with the uh, workshop participant after that. So in at least one case, we were able to give them a specific example.
And I think it was amazing. I mean, I think that was a totally great. And it's like, I wonder if we can maybe collect a few more of those.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to remember in Miami too, were the events, were they, I know there's always modeling of the different activities, but I almost feel like in Miami there was one of the modeling times that I'm going to do this as if I'm working with this population and I'm going to intentionally try to do this, and then modeling what that looked like, and then turning it over to the participants. Am I misremembering that? Again, that yeah, that was a year ago, but
I think that was you. I think you did some of that.
Maybe, yes. I kind of remember modeling because Kenda didn't go to the Miami one, and I remember modeling the biology one for people, but the details aren't coming to my head. Sorry.
but that might be something too that gonna provides another piece of the concreteness to the strategy to know how am I going to try to approach this and practice this with our current group of participants while we're in this session that deals with that content, and then thinking about whether or not that's what I'm going to try to do for the engagement event when we get to the planning stage.
Okay, great. Is there, Dylan, is there, so this is a great conversation. But I'm wondering, Dylan, is there anything else specifically from the report for San Antonio that you want to talk about?
Last pieces are just a couple of different things that participants had requested that might also help. One of them being before the workshop, having more of the materials accessible to support some of the pre-learning. One being a potential tentative agenda, having some more explicit information around like the series model or even the strategies with some accountability for, looking over those before they get there. A lot of them had noted there was a lot of the materials that they were there and they were in the binder, but they weren't referred to, or they weren't explicitly addressed, or they didn't have time to look through them then. They didn't have them before, so they didn't have time to do it beforehand, which also led to another recommendation from them saying that the materials that are given in the workshop, either in the binder or in the folder, should probably only be ones that are being actively used during the workshop time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Andy and I have talked a little bit more about maybe, given how much things were pared down for San Antonio, maybe not having a binder at all, just having folders for everybody. And having additional resources, all a lot of the stuff that's in the binder is additional resources, additional information, additional vocabulary terms, hard copies of all of the activities. If that's just available electronically in general, beforehand and throughout, but that the only handouts are actually folders with those things that they need directly, instead of having binders.
Mhm.
Um,
That, and I mean, just being able to refer back to a worksheet or the model, the objectives and outcomes explicitly. I think there were times too that they had noted we started with this worksheet, but we didn't come back to it at the end of the activity to kind of to wrap it up or reconnect it back. So even if something is there, just making sure it does get connected back to it. And the very last piece, which I know is something has been talked about, was the educators had explicitly said that they do want science content from the scientists. They want to be able to learn that content from them so that they can develop new engagement and work it into their own engagement. And I think they even made some recommendations for, hey, it'd be great if we held this time so that we can learn things from the scientists and then think about how we can create some new activities out of it.
Um, can you repeat what you said? Their recommendations is that they could do what with time?
Hold some time.
Hold how much time?
Let's see, I think this was in the focus group. I'll see if I could find a quote. Hmm. I'm looking in the wrong spot.
Okay, it's okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure there was a specific.
Okay. The thing, sometimes a part of our goal had been that the scientists would share some of their content while they're doing the activities. It's not a huge amount, it's a bit. Do you felt like that happened in San Antonio with this, the revised model? Was there a way for that to happen still with that there as well?
There
It seemed like,
is.
sorry, go ahead.
I would just say, no, that's still there. We didn't really change what the mini events are like, other than we were just a lot more explicit about, like, we have this sheet where we said, okay, talk about, some ideas. How have you done this activity in the past? If you have, how have you facilitated it? And science, including for scientists, what are some things that you've talked about in terms of science with it? And then we would ask them, okay, now that you've done this, then we say, okay, now think about the discussions we just had and how might you change it? So it's still vulnerable. It's still there just as much as it ever was. That opportunity is.
Yeah, there was one workshop that in the study workshop, Jeanette saw some of the scientists and educators following the directions, which normally doesn't happen, where the scientists would talk about the activity with respect to their science, and then the educator would talk about the activity with respect to it as an educational tool and what they would do with. And I think that was the only workshop that I've been at where I was told that really did happen, because most of the time it didn't. And yeah, social mixer, to get them intentionally mixed. How do we create that time and space on top of everything else for the science? That's was one of our goals initially, and then it kind of wound up falling away. But during social mixers, it can happen still, hopefully.
Well, one of our initially when we wrote when we were proposing it, that, I mean, the idea was to do that to help draw in informal educators to attend. And then as we were going through the workshop, we're learning that, well, but we're not really getting a lot of time to do that. That was one, at least in my mind, that was one reason for changing things up a little bit this time around, is actually trying to put a little bit less of an emphasis on the science.
Ed, you please share.
I think I know it was Kenda who suggested this. I just don't remember when. But Kenda, at some point suggested that maybe at the beginning of a social mixer, the SMEs and the IEs have like a one slide introduction for each other where they're like, this is my background, this is what I do. And then intentionally after that, we say, all right, we're going to go into the social mixer, eat, be merry, but maybe talk with each other about like how some of y'all's expertise can be turned into engagement practices and how those practices can be informed given like the strategies. And you like just cue conversation, but then you let them wild.
Yeah, I don't remember when I suggested either, but I still think that that would be a helpful thing to do. But yeah.
Not all social mixer locations are geared for slides, but absolutely there should be a way to let people do that. And I'm kind of hoping during the pre-orientation we let everybody introduce themselves a little bit more ahead of time, and then at least for Boulder, we've got time for tours for those who actually take the time to attend the tours. They'll pick up information from each other during the tour too. Haven't done as many tours as we initially wanted to. Hasn't always happened. Time constraints. Of course, all the local people will probably skip out on the tour to do work instead, so.
I'm wondering, I think it's something that it always makes sense that it's going to shift with the timing of the workshop. I'm thinking about Boulder and the fact that how much time there is on the front end of the engagement event day. I don't know if that is a time that makes sense or if it should happen earlier. But it seems like a potential opportunity.
Yeah, no, what we're looking at is an optional tour that morning into but as Alexander said, we don't want to fill it up with like lots of stuff, maybe one thing, give people a break before the event. But a tour the morning of the event, and then I'm thinking, since Nick brought up maybe a free planetarium show, maybe that would be one of the evening social things, is what I'm thinking. Anyway, which counts as another tour too. We get to see the planetarium. We've only got like 3 minutes left. Dylan, was there anything else from the report that you wanted to share out?
Those were the big pieces that I had pulled out to note.
We do want everyone to know that during July's meeting, so thanks everybody for input about facilitation. Andy, do you want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen during July's meeting, team meeting?
Just that, so we had a conversation with a few people from McCrell who do like facilitation workshops, trainings or whatever. And they're putting together an agenda based on what we discussed on what this hour-long session could look like. So I'm still waiting to hear back from them on that, but that's what we'll do for our July meeting.
And I think we need to remember to record that for anybody who can't make it to that one, but I'm really looking forward to it. Does anyone have anything else to discuss right now? I know that everyone's busy and got a lot going on.
I don't have anything openly, but Christine, if I could talk to you just for a couple minutes afterwards, that would be great.
Sure. So we talked about many different things that are changing in terms of our model, including, you know, keeping things simpler and shorter, enabling and continuing those rich discussions and supporting the participants coming up with the key points themselves. So not telling them what we think, but allowing them to share that with each other. Stretch goals, including practicing strategies during the activity period, and maybe switching it up. So instead of maybe starting off with what they're comfortable, but pushing beyond, okay, here's what I do, to what would you do if, and pushing it out a little bit further, and changing things. Earlier we said we were going to have evergreen binders, and now it's looking like we're just not going to do binders. We're going to have a folder with some sheets in it, but instead of 100-page or a 60-page binder, it's going to be 5 to 10 sheets, and then there can be an electronic thing that has resources for them. And I'm hoping that electronic thing will be evergreen, and we can just send them to the website for it beforehand. Anything else? Andy, any concluding thoughts?
Nope.
I'm going to hang on, Kenda. I'm happy to talk with you.